Good evening, everybody.
Someone confirm this is real life right now.
So, thank you for joining us.
I hear you, Annie.
Thank you.
Village of Essex Junction
I thought it all froze.
Board of Trustees meeting.
No, it doesn't look like they have the audio on at Lincoln.
Can you hear us?
I was like,
They can't hear us.
thanks.
But I think that Andrew can hear us, correct? You can hear us, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm in a room. Sorry.
No, you're good, Annie.
Am I muted or not? I can't see.
Yes, we are muted.
Yeah.
I almost called us to order.
I don't see your cursor. There you go, right there. Now we're good.
All right, Zoom world, can you hear us now?
Yay, yeah, we can.
All right. Well, we just took four actions without you all, so I'm just kidding.
Cool.
I'll go ahead and call the meeting for the Village of Essex Junction Board of Trustees for Wednesday, May 25th, 2022 to order. Thank you all for being here. I know of one agenda addition for tonight. Does anybody have any others? Seeing nothing, I believe our only agenda addition is not on my screen. 5E to consider a reduction in Planning Commission membership. If there is no other recommendations for changes or additions, I would entertain a motion to add or to amend the agenda.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to add the reduction in the size of the planning commission to business item 5E.
Second that.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Dan. Trustees, any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. All right, so that passed unanimously. Thank you. Next, we go into public to be heard. So this is a portion of tonight's meeting where if there are any members of the public who wish to address the board about something that is not on the agenda, then now is the time to do so. For those of you using Zoom, please go ahead and use the reactions and raise your hand function. And I will make sure to offer you time to speak to the trustees. And while those of you in the Zoom land are getting ready to put your hands up if you have any questions, anybody here in the audience? Okay. Back to Zoom land, I don't see any hands up. So go ahead and close the public to be heard and move into business item 5A, a department head conversation with the man himself, Rick Jones, Public Works Superintendent. Hi, Rick.
Hello, how are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
And Andrew, could I just preface this? Andrew and I had some conversation. Rick is our guinea pig tonight, but we'd like to start doing at the second meeting of each month a department head conversation. And basically, you know, most of the time the trustees and the public get to interact with the department heads is when there's an issue or during budget hearings or finance. And there's not typically an opportunity just to say hello and connect and learn about what's happening in the department and with employees and operations and budgets and all of those things. So Rick is the first one to go tonight to kind of indulge. This is intended to be a loose conversation of 10 to 15 minutes. He'll be sharing a little bit of what's in the packet. And then it's an opportunity for the trustees to just have a conversation with Rick to learn more about Public Works. And ask him anything else you'd like to ask him. So tonight's our first night, so I'll turn it to Rick.
All right. So you guys have any questions, or should I read these off, Brad? Or do they read the bullets already?
I think they've already read them. I don't know if there's just a couple of things you want to highlight, and then we can move into questions and answer.
Sure. Like I said, we went, I think the two big things is the short staff for this winter. You know, that was kind of a bear, but they made it through. And then we've got the new people now, so we're full at Public Works. So we're going to get those guys trained up and going. And it was real good that Colleen, we put the pressure on her when she first got here. We were down a person, then we were down another person. So she really had a lot to do with Public Works right off. And I told her we're usually not this needy. So, but yeah, that's kind of the big highlights, I guess. You guys want to shoot some questions?
Yeah, I can imagine that being short-staffed during the winter is increasingly difficult in and of itself, just given the need for plowing, road maintenance, and all that you all do in the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Timing must have been difficult.
Yes, no, but we made it through. Everything looked good.
Yeah.
So.
So I guess more importantly, and something that I assume is high on the community's minds, are we going to have to rename the Super Sucker 5000 to like the Super Sucker 55,000 or 5500?
You know, once we see it and how the performance is, maybe we should come up with a name then. You know,
City Super Sucker.
Ooh.
that could be. It could be.
I see Amber has her hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, that's what I was going to ask about, because everybody wants to talk about the Super Sucker 5000. So how's the looking for a new one going, Ricky?
Good. Yeah, it's in the consent agenda for you guys to approve tonight. So yes, no, we went through the bid process, and we chose the one bidder, and we gave a little memo there for you folks. But yes, so no, we finally got it all nailed down, and all you guys do is put your blessing on it. We can get it on order, and who knows when it will come in, you know, with the shortage of everything.
What do we do with the old one?
That's getting traded in.
Oh,
If it's something you want to buy, you can talk to the winning bidder. You know, if that's something.
I think that would be kind of an interesting thing to see running around the village, you know, somebody's personal vehicle driving to
Yeah.
to work.
It's
So there might be some additional bids here.
Right.
Thanks, Ricky.
Well, okay.
I mean, if somebody can move into it, it might be cheaper than a house.
You're not wrong there.
No,
No,
I'm just saying, does it have like an extended cab where you can put a bed in the back?
no, it doesn't. You could remove the back of it off and then maybe build something on the back,
Build
but
it like a tree house on the back.
possibly. Yes.
This is going well. Sorry, Ricky.
No problem.
George, were you trying
Oh yeah, Rick, I just noticed that is the sound in the room on too, or am I getting like a tinnitus thing? Okay, all right. So you're looking at something that will fit in the shop. So in other words, is this a sort of a second choice because your first choice wouldn't fit in the shop? Is that what you're saying?
It did limit it to some manufacturers because of the height. Yes, trying to get into. We left a whole inch wiggle room to get into the building. You know, so hopefully our next new building will have a little bit taller doors.
So we could have had a Super Sucker 6,000 or 8,000, but we had to settle for the 5,500.
No, this is a very good machine. Yes, but yeah,
Okay.
we could add some more. We could add a few more options.
All right.
Yes.
Trustees, any other? Raj, go ahead.
Yeah, Rick, I guess just quickly, you know, we've talked about the building. You've mentioned the building in the memo. You know, briefly, what are the few main challenges you're dealing with your current space? I think you have a sort of a platform right now. It'd be good to kind of get that out. You know,
Sure.
what are the issues and what are the main challenges you all deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, fitting the equipment in the shop. You know, as far as we can't put everything in, there's a lot of vehicles that are stored outside to get everything in there. Then, of course, the height restriction. We can't pick the bodies up of the dump trucks in the building to get them, grease them and clean them. So those have to be backed outside, you know, greased out there. It's not bad during the summer, but these 20 below days, it's not great for the guys. But mainly, I think the big thing would be to get all the equipment in the building so we don't have the backhoe sitting outside, you know, in that 20 below stuff. We've got it plugged in, and it has started most times, so we've been good with that. But you know, it's the hydraulics alone and trying to get it to move. It's difficult on equipment. So that's some of the bigger things. And really need an upgrade to our break room. You know, the bathrooms. The bathroom, we only have one. Yeah, it's a 1956 state building. It's done good. It's done real good. You know, but we're outgrowing it with the equipment we're getting.
I appreciate your positive spin on that. But totally hear you.
And if I can just expand for a moment, you mentioned, Rick, that it was a 1956, I think you said, state building. It was not a 1956 state office building. It was not a state-of-the-art 1956 state building, but rather a 1956 storage garage.
I believe it was a highway garage, yes, you know, for the state, I believe. That's what I'm hearing from some of the older gentlemen that I've talked to around town and stuff. So yeah, I believe they worked out of it for a little while, and then the village took it over somehow. I'm not sure how that worked, but yeah, it's worked great for that. But we're just outgrowing it, and it's getting old.
Right. Vehicular needs have changed in the decades since the size, the structure, people have changed, and the needs for a bathroom beyond what was there in 1956. It's just want to put some of that extra context in for those who have not had the pleasure of going over there and visiting.
You're right on track there, Andrew. I mean, I feel the same way. I'm more concerned about the human space where the workers have to. You're kind of going light on that, but I've been over there, and it can't be pleasant in the middle of the winter in that really tight space with all the people crowding around. In my mind, that's what really needs to get fixed first. But you haven't had, in all the years when we've been fixing up facilities around the village, you haven't, other than I think a salt shed back a little while ago, you haven't had any upgrades and any improvements for my entire time on the board anyway. Can you think of any improvements or renovations that have happened over there at all?
No, he said the salt shed is the only one, and you know that was a big deal. That was great. The other salt shed was falling down, and then what we had put up was great. That's going to last many, many years, and we can even add on to that shed, you know, down the road easily. So no, that was a great thing to get that done. If we can just work on that big garage structure, and then even the little pole barn out back on the sides there, that's in really rough shape.
Any other questions for Rick?
I just want to go off on a different angle. You know, one of the things we're talking about tonight later on is we're talking about this, you know, having a park over here, and some folks wanted to put flowers over there, you know, increase the number. And what, just generally, Rick, how much of a burden is it? Maybe it's not a burden at all. Maybe it's a fun thing to do, but around the village, places where we have little garden areas. I noticed one of your, someone was out watering trees today. How much of that do you do? And how, is it a burden? Is it, do you need more help? Or if we increase the number of things around the garden spots around the center of the city, I guess I should say, is that going to pose a problem, or how does that work for you?
I don't believe so. No, that's something we can handle. Yeah, we've got Tyler that does our gardens. So the really weedy, picky, the nice, you know, the green thumb stuff. Our public works guys aren't the greatest with that. We can water trees. We do that for the tree committee each year. You know, that takes anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how many trees they put in. It's not a huge deal. And yeah, we were working with Harlan the other day, and he gave us some cement plan, like a planter type thing. We're working on those. We were getting those fabbed up, and I had Nick and Bridget came over to look at them, trying to find out what kind of soils we can put in them. So we got them painted up. We got a base in them. We got them movable. So, you know, we got like 17 of those to work on. Yeah, these little projects, yeah, no, we can fit them in. We squeeze them in. If there's starting to be a ton more, then it'd be a big deal. But right now, no, we're good. You keep throwing it at us until you see me cry, then I'll say, no, that's enough. Stop.
All right. Okay. All right. Good.
Anything else? Well, Rick, thank you for being here. Thank you for being our guinea pig in this process. I hope that it was helpful for you. I know personally for me it's useful to always see you and talk with you. So thank you for the opportunity again.
No, I appreciate the opportunity too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Andrew, I'm sure you're all aware that Rick is the one who has coined it's the village way. He continues to, you know, spread that amongst especially our new staff, and there's a genuine appreciation for that. And you heard it in his response when you said, can you take on this or do this? I don't really want to see him cry, but I'd be tempted to see how many things you could put on his back before he would, because it is his general nature and his departments to just continue to take things on and take them in stride. And I think, Rick's been here a long time, but he develops that in new department heads. I know that both Colleen and Jess have expressed that appreciation, and they've taken on to the term, it's the village way to just do those things and go out of your way. And yes is generally the answer. Can we do that? Yes. We'll figure it out. And Rick is a leader in the department heads in that sense. So thanks, Rick.
No problem.
Thank you, Brad, for saying that.
Thank you.
All right, Rick, enjoy your evening.
Right. Thanks. You guys do.
Thank you. And next on our agenda, 5B, to discuss the local option tax revenues use.
Yeah, so I'm sure you have been able to read in the memo, but of course you all need to start thinking about how you want to allocate the local option tax. And Jess and I have met, and I believe she is here. And we kind of discussed some ways in which, and have suggested some ways for you all to consider of how to use the local option tax revenues. Those revenues will start coming in October 1st of this year. And so our first recommendation is that we don't use any of those revenues in the FY24 budget, that we wait and allow those actually to accumulate for 1 year to see what comes in. Estimates have been, anywhere from 600 to 750,000. And those are real raw estimates. I'm not even sure of some of the sources of those. So I think our best bet is to not use them in any budget forecasts for FY24, let them come in for a year. And then we've kind of broken the money up into 5 buckets is the way I would term things. Road restoration really seems to be what the capital review committee is already addressing. That capital plan, if you look at it, it's really all about road restoration, and it follows along when most water lines and sewer lines are being replaced, and those get paid for out of the enterprise funds, but out of the capital fund is where we repair the roads and sidewalks that are above those things that are getting addressed. There may be a few things in there that are not related to that, but that's the general gist of the current capital plan and capital committee's responsibility. And so our suggestion is that there be a pedestrian transportation fund. We've kind of talked about this as a sidewalk fund. We loosened up the parameters to be pedestrian transportation, sidewalks, multi-use paths, walkways, trails, bus stops, crosswalks. And I think you already have the existing infrastructure in terms of the bike walk committee for them to take on this role as a community group to identify and prioritize those things, just as the capital review committee does. Rolling stock fund already exists and will continue to be funded through transfers from the general fund. There really is not a great municipal grounds and facilities capital planning budget within the village. And we think it's been absent. And, you just talked about Rick's facility and that facility not getting any attention or money over many years. I think it's just lack of planning, and I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think it's the way that things have evolved. And so our recommendation is to be really intentional and specific about creating a fund that supports municipal grounds and facilities, and to really get things onto a schedule of when roofs need to be replaced and windows need to be replaced and buildings painted and upgrades happening. And our suggestion is that there be a capital review committee, but it be made up of staff. We actually just formed that committee without this thought in mind. We just had our first quarterly meeting, and our recommendation is that that group develops that list and starts to put it on a timeline with estimates. And then the last group is participatory budgeting, and you've all had some conversation about this. There's some information in the packet about what that actually means, but basically it means allocating an amount of money and allowing taxpayers to decide how it's utilized. And you put some parameters on it and figure out a system that works best for Essex Junction. And then you have an annual system for allocating that money as determined by taxpayers. So the breakdown that we've suggested, and obviously this is all up to your interpretation, but these are just suggestions from staff, is 65% of the revenue that comes in through the local option tax go to road restoration and municipal grounds and facilities. 20% participatory budgeting, and 15% pedestrian transportation. If those numbers are somewhat accurate on the 600,000 front of revenue coming in the first year, that would mean 390,000 in that first bucket, 120 in the second, and 90 in the third. So that's the basis for your conversation.
Well, it's nice to have the conversation when the presentation is so thorough and so clearly outlined. So thank you, Brad.
You're welcome.
Raj, did you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think this is great. Like Andrew said, I think it's very thorough. It's well thought out. I love planning. I love getting a grip on what's coming, especially, you know, on this topic when we're trying to get a good hold on what the city is going to need over the next 10 or 15 years. I don't have any major issues with any of it. I'm wondering, I guess, if with the breakdown between participatory and pedestrian, which I appreciate being all encompassing. Well, two comments on that. Sidewalks. So with the road restoration portion of it, I guess one of my questions is it advantageous? Do these projects often include redoing sections of sidewalk, or is this strictly generally like grinding and repaving? And I guess part of the answer is probably going to be we'll use those funds on those projects when it makes sense to team up with the work. But I guess my overall thought when I read this was I think we have a major needs for sidewalks specifically. And I'd love to be able to see an analysis of like, I know the crew goes out periodically. I don't know if it's annually or semi-annually to grade the roads. I don't know if anybody's done that with sidewalks recently. So before we commit to a formula for the second two, I'd like to see where we are in terms of need. Because if we are where I think we are, I'd probably want to switch those or adjust those. Not that I don't believe in participatory budgeting. I absolutely do. But, you know, as someone who couldn't bike for 5 months and did a lot of walking this winter and spring, it's nearly impossible to walk up the sidewalk in West Street for a good portion of the year, period. And that's a major sidewalk thoroughfare. Pearl Street on this side of the fairgrounds towards the fort is miserable if you have a walker, any kind of mobility issue or a wheelchair. So yeah, so I guess my only request is before we perhaps finalize this portioning, maybe we should see kind of an inventory of where we need to get to and what projects need to happen. That's it.
Go ahead, Amber.
So the capital committee has sidewalk projects specifically and has never distinguished. I think the requirement of the committee was anything above a capital expenditure above $10,000. And so sidewalks are definitely included. Actually, West Street is on the list already. And we've had some initial conversations about a separate, we have a portion of West Street on that list, the other portion of adding West Street to the list. Sorry, I don't have the list here in front of me, but I do know that there are several sidewalk portions on there. So when I read through this, I mean, I don't disagree. I think this is a great proposal. The only thing as the chair of the capital committee, I see this as just trying to redefine what the capital committee is doing and wanting to make sure that I understood how these two, if we have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 lists, how those lists are going to go together and take priority, because now we have one list right now. And so I'm a little concerned about adding multiple lists. But that's the only thought that I had as to this. I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, I agree with what Amber and Raj have said as far as the sidewalk system we have here in the village/city. Also, we have Rick Hamlin here, and I know the last complete street, I think you call it, when you did Summit, and being that not only are you just pulling on pavement, you go down and lay down a barrier, it's a complete street. The other aspect of this road restoration and sidewalk issue is the village does not plow both sides of the street, sidewalks on each side. And what's happening, or at least it's happened in a few places near where I live in the village, when the sidewalk is in such ill repair or whatever you want to call it, they're removing the sidewalk on the side where it's not maintained, and we're only having one sidewalk. So that's another issue to address. I know, Raj, you're very passionate about this, but I hate to see any sidewalks removed, but I understand it's difficult to maintain everything. But my concern has always been safety of pedestrians, especially the little ones when they're walking out to the road crossing to get to snowbanks and what have you to get to the sidewalk on the other side. That's say.
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Yep.
First of all, I agree that letting this accumulate for 1 year at least is a good idea, because it's a little bit of pie in the sky. We think this is what's going to be available. We don't really know what's going to be available. And the other caution you have with this is that it's going to vary from year to year. So, the first year should give us a sense of the range, and then we can estimate a minimum. I mean, some of these projects might be things you don't want to divide up into little chunks. You might want to say, we want to let some piece, accumulate $500,000 and then do the project. But I also agree with Amber. I'm having, we have a big, long capital project list, and a lot of those are high needs. I know a lot of the sidewalks in Indian Acres have been waiting to be redone and rebuilt, and so the lines between these and also what we're doing now seem a little blurry. I think it's a good plan. A lot of thought went into it, but I think I feel like I'm kind of operating in a vacuum, not knowing what some of our most urgent capital needs are. And again, if we just heard for something like the Public Works Department, that's probably well over $1 million. Even if we divide that up into pieces, it's probably well over $1 million project. So we're probably not going to have that direct local option tax funds towards that. But on the other hand, why not? Why can't you start to make some of those payments? When we have such a high need there. So I just feel like I think this is a good plan, but I think that we probably need a really focused discussion and have a real good sense of our current capital project needs. Projects have been waiting 5, 6, 7 years to be done. So we really have a sense of how we want to divvy this money up.
I think the only thing that I want to add to this, yes, I appreciate also waiting the year to see what type of money it is that we're going to be able to utilize, so that way we don't plan too aggressively and then find ourselves later on needing to find other sources of funding or cutting back on a project that we planned on doing. When we talked about this early on, and I can't recall at this point in time whether this was when I was on the Capital Committee or if this was when it was at one of these trustee meetings, but we had talked about a specific sidewalk fund that would be used similar to the paving fund, where Rick Jones utilizes the study that the CCRPC does, which grades the quality of the roads, and doing something similar for the quality of the sidewalks. And then that is used for the next 5 or so years to determine the plan for repairing certain sections of the sidewalk. That then does not need to be something that would go to the Capital Committee, doesn't necessarily need to go to the trustees. It's just a part of a revolving budget where Rick and the Public Works crew know how much linear feet of sidewalk they have to replace within a given year. And I think that then may help to prevent the need for those larger projects coming into the Capital Committee and having a larger capital expenditure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there is the intersection though of some of the water lines do go underneath the sidewalks, and so at that point in time, then yes, the sidewalks are being replaced just as a function of replacing that water line. So making sure that those are also well coordinated is something that would just be high on my mind. I'd hate to replace a sidewalk and then 3 years later dig it back up and replace the water line.
That's that what you're talking about has happened many times over the years. On South Street, Rick probably recalls when South Street was repaved maybe 15, 20 years ago. Immediately, they dug up a section right near Orchard Terrace. It just seems like you get a new road in, and then it's torn up. In the past few years, they fixed it. It was a hump there for a long time.
Yeah,
So-
I have to say that the capital committee has done a really good job. One of the rubric items in the capital committee matrix is how does this pair with other projects, and to avoid that very thing. And I have to say that probably since the capital committee,
Rick, you want to come up? Come up with just a mustache.
So I was just saying that since the capital committee has been in play, I don't think we've really done any project where we've come back in and dug something up that was just done. Because one of the rubrics in the matrix that the capital committee uses is, how does this project compare to other things, and are we doing something on the surface where the pipe underneath is 2 years down is going to be replaced? So that process, I think, has worked really well. I mean, the thing that we don't have much control over is utilities that come in, the gas company or the cable company that come in to do work, underground work. And we certainly have had that happen where we've done new work and then they've come in behind. And so even that, before we do a road reconstruction, like probably the last major one would have been Memorial Street, we contacted all the utilities ahead of time, got them to come in and bring in conduit and provided it to the contractor, put in for future gas crossing so we don't have to dig up the street. So we try to coordinate ahead of time to avoid that. So I would have to say that the capital committee process has been very successful that way in terms of coordinating projects and kind of looking at the overall picture and not doing one thing and then having to back up and do it again. So I think that's been a really a key part of the success of the capital committee.
Amber, I think your hand was up first.
Yeah, I agree with what Rick's saying. There is one of the matrix pieces that we look at is timing and linkages. And so we are clearly looking at those things to make sure we're not going back and redoing what we've already done. There is a current, the trustees see the 5-year plan, but there is a current spreadsheet that has all of the capital projects. The capital committee hasn't met in quite a while. We are discussing regrouping to meet again soon. There really hasn't been any reason to meet because we haven't had any new projects, but we do have a potential new project and we do have a vacancy that we need to fill. But I do think it's important if we can get that spreadsheet and and even the rubric might be good in the packet for the next meeting.
Go ahead, Raj. You're muted, Raj.
I appreciate the discussion and I appreciate the folding in of the overall pedestrian themes, Brad, because I think it goes together. I guess the only other thing I'd say is, listening to what everybody said and thinking about how the capital committee works, if we're going to ask Bike Walk to do this, it may be great to maybe either have some folks from capital work with them to get them started on how they work, how they use the rubric, how they score. Not because Bike Walk can't come up with their own process, but why do that if we've got a process already in place that, while it might need modification, seems to work. If it needs modification, they don't need it to be that complex for Bike Walk. But if we can get them together to get them started on that. Might save a lot of time and effort. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Raj. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, I think these are all great thoughts, and I guess back up the 15% for the pedestrian transportation. I don't think that that's going to be significant enough to really replace much of a sidewalk at all. I guess what I was thinking is that it would be kind of what you were talking about, Dan. You know how a sidewalk gets replaced, maybe the whole thing doesn't need to be replaced, but maybe there's a section that's either broken or has shifted. And for those of you who walk around or run around town, you can probably identify these. There are just places where you get really big puddles, or there's no drainage, or there's big humps and heaves. And so it maybe doesn't mean that the entire road doesn't need to be replaced, but the bike walk committee would identify some of those smaller projects. That was kind of the impetus or thought about that percentage and where it would go to. But certainly all of this is very flexible, and I think this is just a starter conversation. And honestly, you all don't have to finalize this information for really until next October, and even after that, it would be flexible. So I certainly can get that capital spreadsheet and get some information from Ricky and the rubric, and continue the conversation.
Great. Any other questions, comments, concern? All right. For members of the public, if you have questions, comments, concerns, if you're using Zoom, go ahead, raise your hand, and I'll get to those in the room in a moment. Go ahead, Annie.
Hi, is it appropriate for me to be talking on this a public thing or no?
Yeah. Have a comment on this.
Thanks. I really, there's a great deal of agility to this that Brad is presenting, and I love nothing more than getting work started, and I hate nothing more than it not being prepared when it gets started so that it can be done well. So that's kind of like a stuck place that something can get into if it hasn't got the right prep, agility, model, force, power, energy, and approval and confirmation to go forward. And I'm a little bit just listening about what the Capital Program Review Committee, right? That's what the Capital Committee is that Amber's chair of, right?
Yep.
Let's see, Amber, Timothy Dahl, Karen Dolan, Stephen Shaw, Ricky Jones, Jess Morris on that. And then I'm intrigued about this inner committee that's formed among staff. What I really like about the staff formation, if I'm understanding correctly, am I right that that's what we're talking about? Am I saying this correctly?
Yes.
What I really like about that is that I get confused sometimes with committees that carry a lot of weight about decisions that get made and their ability to be agile because they are volunteers with outside jobs and stuff like that, right? And what I really like about this model that has already been formed is that these are people who are at work and whose job it is to get these things done. And that agility is really appealing to me. And our agility as a city, I'm starting to say agility so much. Our agility as a city now with less people, there's a lot that can be done. And the whole sidewalk and then waiting so long for things to get done makes me crazy. So I would love to see something, either this or something like this get enacted. I would love some kind of, dare I not be rude, transparency or reporting back, or I guess just what I really want to say is I'd love to know more about what's happening and the decisions being made within that staff committee without being rude. And then I would love for things to actually start happening, because really, and I appreciate, Amber, that I haven't offended you by talking like I did about, yeah. So I really, really would love to see things start happening. And I love that the local option tax is going to give us that more agility and all that stuff, because I want us to be able to move and grow. And I'm excited and enthusiastic about it. So I think this is great. And I would love to see how that comes together and as part of Bike Walk. we'll take whatever we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Anybody here? Questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead, Bridget.
I'm pretty loud, so I don't think I need to go up there.
No.
You ready? I want to put in a plug for participatory budgeting. I really love this idea. I've read a bit about it. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think it has so many benefits for the community. It's not only beneficial for you all of us, to hear what people are concerned about and what they want to spend money on, but it brings people into the fold who might not otherwise have participated in any kind of you have budget meetings, nobody comes, or they may get upset after the fact, but this brings people in to have this discussion, and I really, really like it. I don't know how we can boost this, how we can make this a reality, but I would love to see a group or however we begin exploring this to really do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget.
Sure.
All right. If there's nothing else on this, Brad or Jess, is there anything else that you need from us at this moment in time?
No, not at this time. But I do appreciate you calling on Jess. Jess, did you have anything to add? I never really asked you if you wanted to chime in.
No, I think the only thing I'll add, and this kind of points to what Annie was commenting on, the staff committee is really forming. What we're focusing on primarily right now is just getting kind of that inventory by department, so that when we head into the budgeting process this summer and fall, we will have as much information as we possibly can, and having that for the capital committee, having it for the trustees and for the public.
Thank you, Jess. All right, so then we will move on to business item 5C and discuss the 1 Main Street Pocket Park.
If Robin's out there, I'll let him introduce the topic. But I do want, as you all know, Rick Hamlin has already spoken. He's the village engineer, and he is in and available to assist to answer questions. And Miles Waite, I believe, is somewhere out there. There are Miles, and Miles is the environmental engineer who has provided all of the data and details so far on the park. So all of your 3 best resources are in the house to answer all of your questions tonight, to help you form at least a short-term plan, hopefully, and identify at least a long-term process of how you want to address this park. But I'll turn it over to Robin.
Thanks, Brad. One thing is, in the memo, I did contact the CCRPC to see if there were any implications for not moving forward with remediation by September. I spoke to one person there. They said they didn't think there was, but they asked me to contact someone else. I have done, but by the time I sent the email out, I guess they were finished for today. We won't find that out. Basically, and Miles can correct me on this, but the more you take out, the more expensive it becomes. There is a limit to what the grant will pay for. They called a cap, corrective action plan. They called a cap because the best model is to cap it. You take out only what you need to cap it. And the deeper we go, the more it costs. So you can see it. I mean, I'm sure it's this memo or a previous memo where I give a link to what are considered some of the best examples of pocket parks, which generally are surrounded by buildings, unlike this one. So it was Paley Park. There was one in Boston. I can't remember. There was the one I'm very familiar with. I've mentioned before. It was called the Chestnut Street Park. Now it's called the John F. Collins Pocket Park. But they all have elements in common: shade trees, pavers, benches, water. I think they all have those 4 things. Paley Park is lifted higher. The other 2 are on grade. And Miles could speak better to this, I'm sure, but that's the general approach from a best practice perspective. But if Miles wants to jump in.
Yeah, so Robin's right. So the CAP is the corrective action plan, and we developed that after it was already determined. We had this concept that there was going to be very limited disturbance of the soil underneath. The issue with the soil underneath is that when it was road rescue, and before that, for many, many generations, gas tank, the pump island was right in that, along the street, right in the middle of where our park. And a soil boring that was done as part of some environmental work revealed very high concentrations of petroleum all the way down to the water table. So we knew we didn't poke a bunch of holes in there because we knew we weren't going to be needing to disturb the soil. So we developed this plan to eliminate only the asphalt and the upper 6 to 9 inches of soil in order to provide the sub base that we need for the pavers, whether they're going to be bluestone pavers is what Robin's idea was, so it's going to be some sort of impervious substance on top of the soil that we leave in place, the contaminated soil. We know it's down there. We didn't plan to remove it. So we do have some grant money that pays for, so the CCRPC brownfield grants pays for all the corrective action planning, and it pays for the testing and oversight, but it won't actually pay for the implementation of this. So there's no CCRP money that's going into the construction of the park, the materials you need, all that. And in fact, Robin might forget this, but it doesn't even doesn't take care of the soil disposal costs. So when we remove that upper 6 to 9 inches, that's going to have to go to Coventry landfill or treatment facility, and there is going to be a cost to that. And the memo right now is 40 to 50K for getting rid of that soil. But if we go down deeper, then we are dealing with a lot more soil to get rid of. We'd have to get permission from the state to amend the cap, and the state's going to say, well, we want to know how much soil is going to be taking out, how much of it's contaminated, and that's going to mean poking more holes and doing more characterization of what's down there. So it's quite a jump from going minimal disturbance, 6 to 9 inches, to say, trying to get it to a pristine property that has no limitations.
Thank you, Miles. Just real quick, George, and thank you, Robin, as well. Something that was helpful for me is very clearly seeing that really the only grant fund, or the grant fund's use, is limited to only the corrective action plan, and as was mentioned, limited to just that, not the implementation of the actual plan. In subsequent conversations, I had been under the impression that there was some assistance that we were going to get through a grant to help actually implement and do some of the remediation. So seeing here that from our last conversation, we talked about, if we were to plan for digging 2 feet or a worst case scenario 6 feet deep, what are those costs? My understanding is that some of those, or a significant portion of them, would have been covered. Seeing here that that's not at all the case, but instead we're talking to just go 2 feet deep, about $200,000. My understanding is if we went 6 feet deep, we'd be talking about $600,000. That's a significant cost that personally was not something that I had anticipated. And frankly, if we were going to go down that path, I think that we would need some significant long-term planning beyond what we had just talked about at our last meeting. So I think that's something for us to very seriously take into consideration, as there goes the local option tax almost in its entirety, as well as the entire penny on the tax rate. So I think those are important things for us to keep in mind.
I will throw one other thing in there, though. I don't know if you want to hear this, maybe you do, but when we got the money, it was two years ago, before the Governor Scott put 25 million towards brownfields, and there is, and that does cover the cleanup. So there is a pot of money out there. If you really wanted to change tact and maybe not even change tact, maybe you want to try to get the cost of the soil disposal taken care of. It is possible. The grant is still available. I'm not exactly sure how much is left, but it's a possibility.
Thank you, Miles. I appreciate hearing that. you cut out at one point, so I'm not sure. Did you know how much that grant could be for an individual project?
Nope, but I could easily email the DEC project manager and say, by the way, there's a possibility now some additional soil that becomes cost prohibitive for the village to deal with this. Is there availability for grant money that would cover the soil disposal? So, it's a possibility. It's a possibility.
I'd appreciate that. That would just be helpful to know if the grant's $10,000 versus $100,000 versus
Yep.
$1 million. It certainly depends. That could weigh heavily on the conversation. So, thank you for that.
Okay.
Go ahead, George.
Miles, I don't want to put, I'm going to ask a kind of a nerdy technical question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and you may, I may be coming completely out of left field. I've read quite a bit about soil remediation for hydrocarbons, pollution, and other heavy metals in soils, and my understanding is that for a lot of tree species, the bacteria on the rhizomes around the tree roots break down hydrocarbons and turn them into nutrients for the plants. Does that sound something? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
The reason I'm asking is that, a lot of this seems to be going forward. We got into the mindset of saying, well, we want to spend the minimum and we want to cap this and we want to just put up a few trees, which maybe is a, and we're talking about a short-term plan, a long-term plan, and a longer-term plan. But, I just posed the question, do we want to have this polluted chunk of soil in the middle of the city in perpetuity, or do we want to start thinking of a plan that begins to remediate the soil long-term? So let's say next year we put in a park that has 10 trees or 8 trees, but eventually we could get us to the point where you have remediated the soil to the extent that you can remove all the capping and could do something completely different. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, or if you have any experience with that.
Sure. I got two points. One is, yes, it's called phytoremediation.
Right.
Trees can remediate petroleum, but it's very typically where the very high water table, where you got petroleum in the groundwater, and there are pioneer species like birch and poplar that grow quickly but don't have deep roots, and they can they can basically evapotranspirate the contaminated groundwater and expire it. So you can actually treat contaminated groundwater with trees. The old petroleum that's been there for 30 years aren't going to be necessarily remediated. Right, you do get some rhizome, you do get some of the fungal type of remediation, but it's not really it's not significant. It's not like you can clean up that whole place by planting half a dozen trees.
Okay.
The second point is that in this realm of brownfield, it's very common to do what's necessary to protect sensitive receptors. So you do what's necessary to protect people from being exposed to the contamination, and it's very common, you leave it behind. Okay, we can't clean up everything. You do your best to protect the playground next door, to protect the house across the street, protect the wetland down the road. You do all that kind of stuff to protect those sensitive areas. But if it's in the middle of an urban area where nobody's drinking the water, there's nobody playing in the dirt, it is very reasonable solution to just cap it and let it be. So
Okay.
that is just want you to know that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused. I guess I thought that we weren't looking at a massive change in how deep and how much soil we removed. We simply had an issue with lack of opportunity for input and dislike of the design. And as I looked at it during our last meeting, last discussion, and since, honestly, the design hasn't changed in years. So I think maybe I'm lost on this, but I didn't think that we were dealing with people wanting to, take out an exponential amount of more of dirt, as opposed to have an opportunity to change the design of the park. And while that might include areas that might have to be deeper for a section of planting, I didn't think it was an overall foot more, and a a subsequent 100 grand more, whatever it would be. So am I wrong on that? Or because this memo seems to be an argument for continuing with the plan that seems to have been in place for years. Even I think before we started talking about this. When that's just not my recollection of how the last discussion went.
I would say that it does seem that way, Raj, about, I don't want to put an intent to the memo, but in terms of what we talked about last time, we had talked about better understanding, as we were talking about for long-term planning, what the capabilities are, and what the potential financial impact would be about the worst case plan of going down 6 inches throughout the whole area versus 2 versus a couple holes for trees, so that way we would be able to have some definitions if we wanted to then, for long-term planning, hire a consultant or have a community committee come together to help do that planning or that design process, and to help really engage the community. So I'd say where we are at now really is, do we want to do that? Which I'm going to just go out there and say I don't think we do want to go down the path of digging 6 inches down throughout the entire, or redoing the cap to go down 6 inches throughout the entire area here. I don't think we want to spend $600,000 just to dig 6 inches, let alone that whatever we want to put on top.
I guess to be more specific, I'm frustrated that I seem to recall us saying we're probably going to have a group that's going to talk about this in the community. They need to know a baseline of why things are the way they are. And while this memo does address some of that, it also seems to be another argument for leaving the design the way it was, which I think when people out there in the community read it, who have expressed interest in or expressed dislike of the plan, I think it frustrates them. And I guess I'm frustrated too. And again, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but we keep having this conversation and we keep getting essentially the same memo back. This is the only thing that will work. When I recall trying to engage in changing the design, understanding the limitations in a way that wouldn't increase the cost precipitously. So, again, I guess I'll stop. I guess I'm confused.
Go ahead.
I don't think I'm not. I don't see this as. I wasn't proposing that we start messing and digging up more soil or something like that. I was just trying to get a sense, of long-term planning and what the possibilities are. But it seemed to me that the design that we had that went through Robin and Rick, we got feedback that the community. We got a lot of community feedback that said, well, they didn't like that plan, so we were not going to go forward with that plan. And so we were back to square one, trying to figure out what we were going to do. But basically to remove an equivalent amount of soil that was in the plan, but a redesign of what that plan looked like, the elevation of the plan, where the trees were arranged and the benches and so forth. And my point was, since we've gone back to square one and it looks like we're going to start a committee process, I just wanted to get some more parameters about what could happen there. But I'm all in favor. If it were up to me, I'd go right ahead and start doing the plan that we had in place right away. But it seems to me that the consensus of the board is, maybe I'm misunderstanding, maybe we're both confused, Raj, is that we want to go back and start over again, start a long-term plan over again. Is that what we're saying?
Well, George, I wasn't really addressing what you were saying. I thought what you were asking earlier was actually great, because it goes to what I think the community needs to understand about this particular project and its limitations. So
Okay.
that wasn't what I was talking about. I just sort of felt like, yes, I agree with you. I think that's where the board is kind of sitting right now is, there are the limitations of the site. There's financial limitations around that. The community wants to have more input. We have to ensure that they understand that, even a 2 or 3 inch change has significant financial implications and may be prohibitive because of the contamination, but I'll stop.
I mean, I think that the idea, if you don't mind me saying, I think the idea would be to say, let's go and replan the arrangement, the elevation of the plan. But before we do that, let's figure out exactly how much soil can be removed before we form a committee. So you give the committee deliverables and parameters and guidance, how much soil can be removed. We have a timeline so that when will this plan, so we don't find ourselves in the same situation next year, so that we have a plan, let's say by February 1 of 2023, ready to go out to bid. And the committee is also given a budget to work with. And then you mentioned having a consultant, and I think a consultant would be an excellent idea, because I think if you're going to have parameters, you're going to have, limitations on what can be put in there. You're going to have a budget, you're going to have a timeline. And I think also getting a lot of community ideas and actually designing that, working that into a design. I think landscape design is really, it's a skill. I think it's something that people train for and have to learn about. So I think someone that could take all that and work with the committee to get public input, but to come up with a realistic plan and a realistic timeline. I kind of, that's what I thought we should be doing.
Dan?
I like the idea of getting the opinion of the public or people weighing in on how they'd like to see this designed. But as you're aware, we're all aware, more people weighing in, more cooks, it's supposed to whatever it takes. It gets difficult to stay focused on one plan. Everyone's got a different, maybe a twist to it. The other aspect of this, I brought it up the last meeting when we discussed this. Maybe we can go at a hybrid way, because if we're going to cap this, we don't want to get into this precipitous money pit, as it were. Why can't we put some kind of planters, big, above ground, on surface, something that doesn't have leaves that drop off, so something in the pine or the fir, genus or whatever, or type of tree, so that you get that barrier, that buffer, and sound absorption, whatever you get out of it, and maybe some astroturf or something that looks like grass, but can be, because a lot of this is going to have to be lifted and moved out of the way anyways, come winter or whatever needs for, it's this tiny area. I hear Robin compared it to pocket parks in Boston, New York, and around the country, but it's a totally different scale. Down in New York City, you got little parks. When I was working down there in the city, I'd hang out in Manhattan. Just looking at it now, Herald Square, little, I remember sitting out there. I mean, but those are 20 times the size of what we've got here. So we got to have a perspective on what we're doing here. I just don't want to put a whole lot into this and worry about it. I think something that looks nice, people can go in there and just some kind of retreat or refuge from the harsh pavement and busyness of the traffic, whatever we can do.
Robin, is that your hand up?
It is, yes. It's my left hand. First, I'd like to disabuse Raj of any thought. This is a memo in support of the FAST plan. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's nothing, no discussion in this about a pergola, a raised area, nothing. At the last meeting, we were asked to come up with numbers. It would say, what would happen if we put down lawn? What happened if we dug deeper? There was a suggestion, I think, by George that there's going to be a new committee and maybe they should have parameters. I think he just mentioned that, about what would be the cost of their decisions. So I went to Miles and asked him to give me ballpark on certain things. And really, this is just his memo or his email to me put into a different form. This is a way to say, well, if we do A, B, or C, these are the costs. Simple as that from my perspective.
Thank you, Robin.
This is why I'm suggesting that we give parameters and we work backwards. We not just have a timeline, a deadline when we want everything to go ready to go out to bid, but we come up with a total overall budget. And that budget would have to include, maybe we can get grant money from the state to remove some of the soil, maybe not. But again, the committee could play with that. If we're willing to kick in more money, then we can put in more trees. If we have fewer trees, then we'd have more money to pay for some other aspect of it. So those would be the kinds of things that the committee and a consultant could play with. You'd have that parameter, but I think the board would have to set generally an overall budget for what would be available, and then they could go after grant money. But I wouldn't want to see us delay this project for the next 2 or 3 years because we're writing a grant or we think some new grant program is going to come down the pike, in a year. So that's all I'm saying. I think we should set parameters and try to get the project done in a timely way. I want to just switch over and say, because I know we have some folks here, in the meantime, while we're planning this, because obviously whatever we're planning and whatever's going to happen isn't going to happen this summer. And I would like to also say that I met with some folks, we went over there, and we wanted to try to, I would like to suggest that we do something right now to sort of tie it in with the city celebration. There's tons of people using that already. All the other properties that we have in the community, like this building, the library, certainly Maple Street Park, we landscape. Any place that we have that is accessible to the public, we take care of. Those things, that's not for free. Those things cost money. So I'm saying put an equivalent amount of money and let's try to fix this up right now for the summer while we're coming up with this long-term plan. I think certainly the folks who are living down here would appreciate it. And I think we should approach that with the mindset that we don't necessarily have to have a return on investment. When we have a fireworks display or a parade, we don't say, what's the return on our investment? So I think fixing that up, putting some planters over there, getting some nice furniture. We had talked, and Bridget has done a little bit of research about shade sails and some other things that we could do. But again, probably isn't going to happen this summer, but that's one of the other reasons I was wondering about digging up soil. But I would like to say, I'd like to see this broken into 2 pieces, where we have a long-term plan, which seems we were talking about, but also we have what are we going to do this summer immediately to try to make this a little bit more accessible and user-friendly.
Thank you, Jordan. Before we get into the details of a short-term plan, the thing that I wanted to just revisit was from that last conference, for the time we talked about this at our last meeting, was we really do need to define just how far down we're going to dig, as that defines that would be the biggest decision that we would need to make for this longer-term committee. So please correct me if I'm wrong, Brad or Robin, but I think one of the intents here is to also for us to get some level of consensus on that topic as to how far down are we looking to dig, and to see if we can come to that consensus tonight. In my mind, given just what I've seen from the memo with the costs, I think that we do want to go to that point of where we have something along the lines of that original plan where there are some number of trees. I don't care how many, but that ultimately that area is capped with some type of covering on top. It may not be grass, but something that is hardscaped. And then whatever else we do besides the trees are all things that get placed on top of that surface, whatever that surface shall be. So that then a committee for the long term would help to be able to plan what do we put on top of that hardscaped area.
Right.
And how should that look?
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
What are trustees' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I for one agree. I think that's the way to go, is to figure out how much soil are we going to remove, because that gives a number that. And I think that the plan that we saw, generally that had about, is that what you're saying? That had about the right amount. That was, I don't know how many trees were planted there. I think it was like 7 or 8. 5? Okay. That seemed to be a reasonable number, and that seemed to be working. So maybe that's one stake in the ground we can place.
And I can turn it over for public comment in just a moment. I just want to go around the room for the trustees to see if there's any comments or concerns on that. Not seeing anybody in the room.
Can I ask? I just do have one. I had asked Rick Hamlin because of the issue of shade sails and putting stakes and digging up the ground, and what's possible and what's not possible. And we don't know for something like a shade sail or some kind of a pole or structure over there. I guess it would be similar to putting a tree in. You probably have to dig up an equivalent amount of soil, but at some point I would like Rick to address that, because some of us have been talking about what can we do in terms of breaking through the pavement and putting, anchoring things underneath the pavement. And there seems to be some limitations. So in the public to be heard, I'd also like to, if Rick could address that at some point.
Totally.
Yes.
Raj, Amber, anything from either of you?
No, I think the previous plan, the number of the tree placement, number of trees was worked out with the tree committee. I think that part of the plan was pretty well worked out in terms of how much dirt and all of that. So I think that's the way you're suggesting to go forward is good.
Okay. So yeah, I would love to turn this over then if there are members of the public who wish to talk on this item. Whether it's short term, long term, doesn't matter to me. It's all fair game at this point. And if you don't mind, Rick is pointing over to somebody else, okay? Come on up, Harlan.
So I was able to get a hold of some of the documents that Miles has supplied, and it goes to how much remediation, and within some of these documents is a soil excavation management detail, and it's showing in order to put the bluestone on top, it's showing 12 inches of crushed gravel, 12 inches of dense gravel, 3/4 inch of a leveling course, and then a 2.5 inch block. So we're looking at 2 feet, about 2 feet 3 inches to cap it. And it gets a little more confusing. And then there's a geotextile fabric, and then underneath that is potentially controlling contaminated soils. And Vermont Trans 704.06A is referenced, so I would be curious if those subbases are road grade, because we're not actually doing a road, we're doing a sidewalk. So maybe those numbers aren't hard and fast. And then in previous conversations we've had, there's been some discussion, like if we were to grow grass, right? When we were asking as the public before, we said we got to take soil out and then we have to put soil in. And there has been, or maybe I misunderstood, but I am under the impression that there is a certain fabric that is going to go in on top of the potentially contaminated soil. And then new soil would be put on that, and those two soils would be separated by this. But as I look at some of the drawings, and the more I start to learn, and the more that I read about this, and even with what Miles had mentioned earlier, where we are doing our best to keep contaminated soils from contact with the public. not seeing a geotextile fabric. It's just a divider so that your coarse gravel won't mix with your soft gravel and basically mess up your base. But it allows water to transfer through it, which means potentially contaminants to transfer through it. And in the tree planting detail, I don't see a geotextile, which means we'd be excavating a hole, putting the root ball in, and letting the tree grow inside of the contaminated. So I think the only issue is, and I would like clarification to this, is it's okay to have the soil there, although I'd be really interested in the whole division. Like if we did want to put grass in, could we just dig down 6 inches and put new soil on top of that, which then creates a barrier between potentially contaminated soil and possibly the public sitting on the grass? Or does grass growing create a suction that starts to draw those contaminants up into the new soil that we just put in? So these are the types of things that we're trying to plan this park that I'm trying to figure out in my head. From everything that I'm reading, our only concern is any soil that we remove needs to be handled properly and disposed of properly. But I'm not seeing where we're going to separate soils. So I'm curious about whether or not there's a real barrier that would separate new soil from old soil that would never touch each other or leach into each other. And then I'm curious about, because we're talking about hardscaping it, these drawings, is that a state road crushed gravel subbase that we need to put in? Or can that be less so that we can remediate soil less? And then when we get to the something Bridget's going to bring up about wind sails, if we know exactly where those posts are going to go, and I would love to be clarified on this is my understanding. We would drill a hole, that soil would be removed, that hole would be filled with cement. And then when we get up to the hardscape and it's capped, at that point, there's no access to potentially contaminated soil at that hole. And it doesn't matter how deep we go, right? So if it's a 12-inch hole, 6 feet deep, whatever that cubic feet is of soil that we remove needs to be treated as hazardous material or dealt with. I personally don't see an issue with putting in the sail poles. We could go 8 feet. It's just the amount of cubic feet of dirt that we remove. And then refill with cement to hold that base together. And then we would tap it back to the hard surface of whatever's there. So I don't see any issues with that. But if they could speak to us about whether or not we're trying to separate soils, or could we pull out 6 inches of soil and put in 6 inches of new soil and plant grass without some barrier that literally stops water or any transfer between those two soils? Or is that not a possibility? So when we were trying to do the planning, I think this was some of the confusion, and hopefully I've asked the questions correctly to help us all understand when we get the answers.
Thank you, Harlan. Yeah, I'm not an environmental engineer, will not pretend to be one, and would certainly look to Miles to help answer those questions.
Sure. Those are good questions. So first of all, regarding the 2 feet, so the Vermont DEC has the I rule, which is a guidance document that requires, it says when you're capping contaminated soil and leaving it be, you need 24 inches of clean soil. And then the geotextile is what we call a marker fabric. So that 20 years from now, when some excavator's in there to redo that or something, or build something new, they're going to get to that fabric and be like, oh, what's this? And then they're going to figure out, oh, we don't want to mess what's below. So there's another component of this, which is we can cap it, but the village is going to have an institutional control. A notice of the land records that says in the deed, in the land records, it says you're not allowed to dig in this below 2 feet without going through the proper process. So there's 2 reasons we put that fabric down. It's one, again, in my detail, it's to separate the gravel from the native, but also it's the marker fabric.
Does not allow transfer of contaminants, water.
It's really not, when you cap it, you're basically, so we're not planning to prevent the water from getting down there. Because we already know that there's groundwater is being monitored here. There's a consultant that's working for Gabe Handy that's doing groundwater testing here. There is no need to basically, I mean, when we do this from an engineering perspective, you put a liner and an under drain. We definitely don't want to have to do that. So there's no plan to prevent water from getting through the clean into the dirty. That's just what, because it's being monitored, you don't have to worry about that. That's a whole different thing. Now back to that detail.
It's a standard geotextile that I would use in
standard geotextile.
Or
absolutely.
It was installed.
It's not a liner. It's not meant to. Water goes through, and it separates the fines, you know, from the coarse grain. Really, that's what it does. And then it provides this notification.
And with 2 feet of new soil, does it still required to be capped with?
No. So I'll tell you one thing that I've had experience working in Burlington, City Hall Park. And that detail from the paver, I stole from what Du Bois and King provided to City of Burlington, and that's what they constructed at City of Burlington. So, and City of Burlington was funded under the Great Streets, and there was federal and VTrans funding for that. So it's a very good chance that there could be like an over design in terms of 6 inches plus 6 inches. That we might be able to reduce that, and that's something that Rick Hamlin can probably consult on. I'm not a civil engineer, but yes. So if we wanted to have a less than VTrans spec kind of you know, surface, then we could maybe reduce it. I can tell you that.
Okay, and that would be for subbase, and then my other question.
That would be for your subbase, and then so if we can reduce the thickness of subbase, when we can then reduce the cubic feet of soil that need to come out of there. So that is something to consider.
Can we literally take 6 inches across the top of this park, put 6 inches in, and then plant grass in there?
Yes. So the City of Burlington worked to deal with DC that they reduced their need for 24 inches to 6 inches because they knew that if they raised grade, all their trees would die. They would mess up the stormwater. So that 24 inches that I was talking about is negotiable, say, with the city, with the state. But again, what it is at City of Burlington is that it's 6 inches of clean soil with a marker fabric below, and I think the language was established turf. So the turf and the 6 inches alone are going to prevent the kid who's playing in the park from digging down with his Tonka toy and getting to that soil and putting it in his mouth. So the idea is that the established turf and the 6 inches, yeah, it's enough of a barrier.
No matter what the inches is, if we put it in at 6, 8, 10.
Yeah.
Anything below that, we're playing with fire. Anything above that, because we brought new soil in, we can do pretty much whatever we want. Grow grass, put rocks, put cement, put bluestone.
Exactly. If you want to be able to, yeah. So it's the established turf is part of your protection.
Okay.
So the grass was a component of how the state was able to reduce it to 6 inches.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then to your question about your footings for any post or something, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, you're right.
So the way that I said,
it's not going to impact it. You're going to dig a hole so that, and then the other component to this corrective action process is that we would have staff on site. So once the asphalt's removed and they're starting to remove the soil that they need to get their subbase, we would be screening it with field instruments. So that's petroleum, that goes with that pile. That's not, that goes over there. Then we test. So the whole volume of soil that has to go away as dirty is somewhat flexible. We don't really know. So that's why that 40 to 50K number is sort of a generic. It could be less than that if it doesn't need to be managed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Harlan. Thank you. Berta.
So I'm really interested in the long-term plans for this park, but after the last meeting, several of us were a little anxious, eager to get going on something this year, perhaps. And so we met over at the site. Harlan was there, George, myself, Elaine, Nick and Elise Serta, and we talked a little bit about what we might do this year, because we assume that remediation, et cetera, will not proceed this summer. I actually think that's a good idea, because you don't want that area ripped up this summer. That's my opinion. So we have some ideas. Brad, are you ready for me?
I just at your beck and call, Bridget. Yeah.
I know it. So the first thing I really want to thank Public Works and EJRP for collaborating on this, collaborating so thoroughly that there's, aside from the shade sales, there's really not a lot to do. Okay, look at those handsome guys back here. Okay, these are concrete planters that were out in Maple Street Park that they no longer wanted or needed. So they were transported over to our Public Works facility. And one of the guys at Public Works, I can't remember his name, I wish I could, came up with an idea. They were hollow. So he came up with an idea to put a layer of cement in the bottom of them. So this was hardening yesterday when I was there. And maybe you can see that there are also two hooks in the side, which they put those in, which will make it easier to lift them. This is brilliant, right? Then they paint them Lariando red. And
what? They paint them what?
I know, isn't that great? That's what
Lariando red?
Yep.
Is
Rick
that
Jones,
really a thing?
that's what Rick Jones calls it, Lariando red.
Okay.
So so these are ready to go. 17 of them. 17 of them what we're hoping is to put them, and I'm asking for permission here. I'm not asking for anything more concrete than permission, but they could go all along the Main Street side and maybe turn the corner a little bit. We did find out today we can't buy any more of them, so we hope that we could buy more and put them down Maple Street, but we'd at least get Main Street and then perhaps a few on the Maple Street side, figure out what else to do there. Those are ready to go. We went out to Clausen and a bunch of other places yesterday and found out, what kind of soils we'd need, et cetera. And our proposal is that with a volunteer group, we would put these in place and then plant them, and at the same time take care of the area around the food trucks, because that's gotten a little scruffy. So we could at least mow the lawn and do something there around the gazebo and the food truck. So that's the public has said what they wanted was a little screening from the traffic, some shade, and some seating. All right, let's go to seating. That's a good one. All right, EJRP has some equipment that they're not using, and they've offered to let us borrow it until the long-term plan for the park comes to fruition. And they are metal tables with rubber coating, and there are number here and tell me. There are six total tables, and they're like this. There are 4 like this, and 2 ADA accessible tables that are rectangular. So there you go. This can be done, whenever whenever. I mean, these can be done. Now for the shade, it's a little more complicated, and it's complicated because I'm way over my head in terms of how far down can we dig, but I think I heard from Harlan's questions that we can install posts there without too much problem. This is what I'm working with a company that George found in New Hampshire to fabricate the sails. We've made no agreement at all because I didn't know about the posts, and I told her I'd get back to her when I had an answer, and that their lead time is 8 to 12 weeks, but this is sort of what we'd envision for that. So that would be shade over the tables, and we'd have the concrete planters going around the corner.
Yeah, I think that looks great. I remember being at a conference in actually both DC and Indianapolis, where they had sales just like that over some of their playground structures to help keep the kids from getting overheated as they were playing around, and some over the tables, they worked well. They look all right.
Yeah, I mean, we can go solid, but kind of like the colors and the shapes. There'd be a little sun coming through between, but I think that's okay. So we'll see how this comes. We'll see what their quote is and what we think about that once that's done. I have a couple of other ideas if this doesn't come to fruition, but I'm basically asking permission of you all to do this, to put the planters out, to plant them, and to Jake has said we can use his water. He might want a little bit of a kickback, but we can use his water. I think we can, for this year anyway, with the help of Tyler at Public Works, we can keep it watered with volunteers and Tyler. We can keep it watered and maintained, and the picnic tables cleaned and things like that. So, yeah, I'm just asking for permission.
Can I make a slight correction?
Sure.
So EJRP is actually trading temporarily. The round ones do have an umbrella.
I'd forgotten about the trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll remove 6 and I'll install 6. And I would be more than happy to, once some of the other people work on it, figure out how many picnic
Yeah, I just want to thank Harlan and the guys over at Public Works for collaborating so quickly on this, getting it done, and they're amazing, just amazing. So yeah, so just ask for permission. If you think it's a good idea, we'll move ahead with it.
Great. Thank
Do
you,
you have any
Richard.
questions? No.
My only question would be for Rick, but wait till his turn. Speaking of. Hi. So just a question on the short-term portion. With those sales, is there a way to anchor them? Where would we have to put anchor them into the ground, or use some type of concrete footing to hold them down? Or
Yeah, I'd have to see a detail of what they're using for posts. It's a little hard to tell from the picture. But with any size of sunshade, the wind load at the end of those poles is pretty significant. So I'm sure their typical design is to set them in the ground. If you didn't do that, you'd have to guide them some sort of surface plate to keep them on kicking out loads. So is it possible? Yeah, maybe. One of the problems is that the surface we're dealing with is asphalt. It's not concrete. So obviously when it gets hot, it gets soft. It's a pin to it. Don't hold it. But with some information from the manufacturer, we could see if they could actually be placed and if something could be fabricated to locate the base and then somehow guide the posts. And again, depending on how many posts there were. And I mean, ideally you would sink this, but in the perfect world, when we go to actually excavate the soil, excavate penetration, excavate posts, you want to move on material once you have it's people inspect the soils there, and all that happens at once. You do it once, and take it away. Could happen in phases, but to do it once. So, but we could get some details. We could see if there be a way to leave the asphalt in place, which I agree would probably be the best to come up with that final plan. Because it's not just the number of trees, it's exactly where that tree is going to go to calculate the volume of what's going to be removed. Is there anything else? Is there a light pole? Turns out that it's security light. Light pole has a base of 6 feet. That has to be fixed. If you want to have water line to water plants, that needs to be 5.5 feet to protect it from freezing. And any surface that you put down. So let's look at the bluestone. You could reduce the material under the bluestone, but I wouldn't advise it because it needs to be frost-free material. Otherwise, your bluestone will heave due to frost. And with bluestone, that would mean, you can reset it, but you'd be resetting it on a regular basis. So you could go less if you went with a concrete cap and then scored it, saw cut it in a pattern, or you could certainly do it in a decorative way, and then you could skinny up the material underneath because the concrete itself is not thick and it's dense. Would tend to move less than individual panels of bluestone. So these are all the things that the committee should take into account. I think the idea of saying, look, here's 20 cubic yards or 25 cubic yards you get to work with, that we're willing to remove is perfect, because that sets the really nice guidelines to say what can and what can't we do. I know the tree committee was pretty adamant that the amount of area that needs to be removed to plant significant trees there is significant. It's a lot. The area that needs to be removed to plant a tree, I was quite surprised, but it's a big volume. Here are the limits. I think it's a really good idea to help them formulate the ideas, because they know those limits.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, we've got two things going on here with the sales. It looks nice, but my understanding, if we're looking at putting in trees to shade that area, aren't you? You're putting up sails to shade the area. Now you're putting a tree to shade the area. The other thing with trees, Rick, I understand, my basic understanding of trees is usually the top of the tree, whatever the leaves and whatever, measure that canopies, usually the root system's equal to that in general terms. And I don't know how deep they go, but with those planters that we were just looking at, Public Works, set up. Can't they put something like an arborvitae type things that I see? It's nice to be protected from the sun and have some shade there, but to plant a tree and wait for it to be a buffer for the traffic and the congestion going by, whether it's pedestrians doing things or motorcycles or what have you, big trucks. I would think we'd want something that we're not going to have to wait.
Yeah. So sunshades are a great idea because they will provide the shade immediately. And I can see in a long-term plan that the sunshades are installed, but so are the trees planted. And over time, there'll be less of a need for the sunshades potentially, and the trees will grow. I think there's, from the standpoint of sound buffering, you're not going to get that much vegetation. It take a lot of vegetation to make a significant difference with the sound there. So the trees really, ultimately, their goal would be to provide shade and to provide a kind of space, a guide for that space, and obviously the air process, all the things in the air that the trees do, and so they're really a shade piece. You really want them to be tall and canopy to be fairly high to provide that shade, cast the shadows farther distance, but also so you can see under it. So you can see the businesses, so you can see the streetscape. For example, you wouldn't want to put a hedge very very high hedge all the way around because it would be a security issue, in terms of enclosing that space. So having it somewhat open is actually good for the security standpoint. Anyway, so I see a plan that could include both the sunshades initially and the trees eventually would take over that whole of the shade. So if the shades came as a part of the final plan, then all the remediation happens, all the collection of the contaminated soils would happen at the same time. But in the interim, maybe there's a way to figure out a way to pin that, so we don't have to excavate. Or maybe Miles would say that the amount of excavations here, is fairly straightforward. It can be done with an auger. It could actually be done with the super sucker. I got to say that. Sure. I got to say that. So with the new super sucker, and it could be very discreet because the soil would be collected and could be taken to a facility because it really would do a great job of allowing that hole to be set. We've had good luck with that actually with other things in the village in terms of making tubular structures. So there might be a way of doing that in the interim. I don't see anything, kind of again village way. I don't see anything that's been suggested here that isn't impossible to do. Just it's a matter of making a decision as to what that thing is.
Thank you, Rick. So, Bridget, do you have?
Just one quick thing. I forgot to say that in those planters, we're going to be planting grasses that were like 4 feet tall, probably around 4 feet above the planter, and underplanted with some simple vegetation. These aren't going to be low flower planters. They will actually have grasses in them. It's not going to provide much of a buffer, but at least it's a visual screen for for people sitting there and also for people driving through the corners. Just look nice.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Rick, as well. So just going to virtual Zoom land. If there are questions from the public, comments from the public on this, and I think I see Annie Cooper's hand up.
Thanks, Andrew. Although I see Robin's hand is up too. Maybe that has import from what Rick said. Should I?
Go ahead, Annie.
Thank you, Bridget, George, Harlan, Elaine, Elise, EGRP, Brad. That's great. If Bridget and George and Harlan in your movements, if those 2 steel bike racks could go the way that from whence they came, they only briefly went where they are now to block some traffic, and they just really make the nice colorful bike racks look terrible. So if we could use the planters to do the job and put those somewhere necessary and not there would be great. That wasn't what I was going to say, but I'm really excited about all that everyone has done. Thank you so much, Bridget and everyone. I wish that Miles was still here because I was really excited about when he said these words, a pristine property that has no limitations. That's very exciting to me. And if there's grant money for that, I would like to figure that out. So just as an exploratory conversation, but not as an actual hunting down, I would be intrigued to learn a little bit more about if that could be done. But that's just an exciting idea to me that I had not considered was possible until he said it. Secondarily, I agree with Raj that I think, well, I guess I've been swayed to not, but thank you, Raj, for speaking up as you did before. It was really, I felt very valued our community as a community member. George, thank you for the work you did with that outreach. I'm sorry I'm talking so much. The plan for the park that the community is giving feedback on is the design above ground. Right, so whatever happens with the soil, although I'm still excited about the whole pristine idea, so really excited about that. But whatever happens with the soil, the community feedback is about what's on top. And that's where, and quite frankly, I think your committee is already forming itself and obviously very engaged and active. So thank you very much, everyone, for hearing us and for taking these steps that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, just thinking about the polls for the sales, and Rick talking. I think he was really talking about the moment of bending. You know, how deep's the pole going to be? What sort of weight's going to come from snow if they're still up there? They're going to be taken down. What if a wind comes through? You'd have to work out the moment of bending on the pole so that nobody gets injured. And then when was it? Dan was talking about, you know, how long do we want to wait for shade? Well, there may be a way to have light poles also be the poles that hold up the sailcloth in the interim before the trees mature and have a canopy that will give shade. And therefore the poles could do double duty. They could give tensile strength to the sails, but also provide light in the park. It's just a thought, but it might be a way to get 2 for 1 in terms of the sails and light, because I think we are going to have light in the park, although we haven't really talked about it. And also give us a way to get shade more instantly, if for want of a better phrase. And then wait for any trees that are there to get to the point where they can do the job too. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Robin. So then coming back to the trustees here, we had a short-term request for things like placing the planters, picnic tables, and sails, some way to anchor them. Personally, I don't see any harm in the plantings and picnic tables. They already exist. They're already here. It's just having staff go and put them out. Sounds fantastic to me. Anybody disagree?
I don't disagree, Andrew, and I actually think that we might want to designate a small amount of money from our penny on the tax rate Downtown Economic Development Capital Fund. It should be a better name for that, but you know what I'm talking about. Maybe something like we authorize Brad and Wendy to up to $10,000 to help if they need flowers, if they need some assistance on doing that. I don't know if you have any need for if you identified any financial needs about that, right, to make that all happen, but I'm going to guess that somewhere along the line you might need that. So I'd like to just make that offer. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it, but I know the downtown, we contacted them as part of the downtown committee, but they have a certain pot of money for that. I mean, for the city celebration. So I wouldn't want to see money come out of that, but I think that we certainly have plenty of money in that fund and a little bit of money to help them that if something arises, so they don't have to wait until we have another meeting and then we approve the funds. You could have Wendy and Brad have access to those funds.
Yeah, I'm going to feel a bit like a party pooper. My understanding, though, is if we didn't warn something as a decision, then with open meeting law, we can't make a decision on it.
Okay, well, we could do it.
So I think we could do it through the consent agenda at our next meeting in 2 weeks. That doesn't help with tomorrow. It doesn't help with a week from now.
Okay. That sounds good. That's good.
Planting season is long. So
Yeah.
Just get
Right.
into spring or just next spring. So.
Right. But yes, totally here and don't disagree. Hang on a quick second, Bridget.
Yeah.
There was also it's along those lines. I would say that's where for sales and that kind of thing, I think that would allow for some additional exploration as to how to actually do that in some way.
Right.
Help to try to figure out some kind of needed cost to then come back to us for that in particular.
Right. It sounds like that might be more longer term. And it sounds like and I really like what Rick said, that you might in the design, the overall design, you might have it so that as the trees are growing and they're not going to give a lot of shade for the first few years, they're not going to do much. they're going to be more needy than giving. And so you might want to have it so you have shade sails in there, and then slowly you transition away from them. So that would have to be incorporated into the design. And when those could happen, I think, Bridget, you had mentioned to me that it looked like a pretty significant lead time. Even if we knew exactly what we wanted and ordered them tomorrow, it would still be like a month and a half or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's 8 to 12 weeks.
And we don't know what we want, and so that's going to probably add a little bit of time to it. So, probably just the planters and the seating and maybe a few other things like that for the time being, and the disposal of the bike rack, obviously. You know, but yeah.
Right. And then in terms of Amber, Raj, any concerns so far? Sorry, I have a glare over most of the TV, so I'm not seeing it. Probably have hands up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand it. There's a pretty large shortage of bike parking down there, and if we make it more welcoming, those bike racks are pulled out. Maybe they can go in the parking lot or someplace not too far away, but they certainly aren't attractive where they are. But just want to make sure I understood what was being brought up in that. Otherwise, it sounds great.
So then for the longer term portion, one of the things that we'll definitely need to make sure that we define at another point in time, just that the structures, the boundaries, both in terms of financial, but also then in terms of the technical engineering side of things, to make sure that what doesn't get created or recommended ends up being something that the whole cap has to be redone again. And here we are at the exact same place we've already been at for months, and further delaying where we are.
If you don't mind, I don't want to be the dominant. But if you don't mind, it sounded like we were almost there in terms of 20 cubic yards. I wrote that down. That was an approximate. It sounds like if Rick and Robin and maybe other staff could get together, maybe Harlan get together, and as I said, come up with those parameters that we could then give to a committee. But you give the committee the tight parameters that they have to be working with, so they know what they're going to do, and they know when they're going to do it, and so forth. And maybe there could be that collaboration, so that you come up with a document that we can pass on to a committee.
What would be very helpful is to know what the budget is
Yeah.
for the soil room, because if you can give us the dollar, I can coordinate with Robin and Miles to find
Right.
out what the current costs are, we can back solve that.
Right.
So what Rick's just bringing up, when you just said that the whole thing of 20 cubic yards or 25 cubic yards, whatever the cubic yardage is, what I heard from the discussion earlier was that the cubic yardage, the cost is going to be contaminated soil. We could pull 20 cubic yards out of there and find, and the 20 cubic yards we pull out, only 10 are contaminated. So we have room for taking more? Are you talking 20 cubic yards of contaminated soil, or just 20 cubic yards of soil? That's a big difference.
Yeah, and let me just say 20 is.
Yeah, I know, it's arbitrary. You just threw that number out.
Yeah, don't
Right.
don't set
No.
set your sail on.
20 cubic yards is a lot of soil.
Talking about what I meant was the hard number, so that we know the stuff that we can say here are the parameters.
Well, the thing is, what we don't know is what we're going to run into for contamination.
Plan for the worst.
Right, exactly.
Plan for the worst, and then if the costs are less, then you can put more money into the infrastructure above ground.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would suggest, given the history of that site, and given the history of that site in relationship to another site directly across the street, which has contaminated soils that have migrated, I would plan for the worst.
Yeah.
So in terms of just planning for that dollar figure, Rick, in your estimation, as what I would say is the expert in the room, we have in the memo of the $40,000 to $50,000 range as a worst case scenario. Do you think that that's a realistic worst case?
So what I would say to that is determine for the village, for the city, what amount of dollars you want to commit to that, and then let us back solve. Because again, the cost is going to vary. You know, disposal of soils is a commodity like so many other things, and it's going to vary. So I want to tap into Miles' experience in terms of what's happening right now for those disposal costs. So I think the best thing to do is say, look, we're willing to commit this much money to remediate that site, and then let us be creative to use that money the best way possible to get the best results, you know, through the committee in terms of what can be done, you know. So and this is definitely a collaborative effort, because like the tree committee says, look, in a perfect world, we'd like to see this amount of soil removal, but could that be a little bit less? There's negotiation to be done. And the same thing with the surface. Can we use a different surface, and perhaps save some money, and also lessen the amount of material, and then save some money there too? So I would say figure out where you stick a pin in that amount that the village is willing to spend, then let us use that best way possible to do the most work.
Can I just, looking at funding sources and how to get to mitigate the issues we have and what we'd like to see designed. I looked at Burlington on Church Street. Church Street, if you go walk up and down Church Street, there are pavers in the center of the street that people could buy. Give a certain amount of money, you can, but in memory of, you know, Sarah Brown or Jim Jutras or whoever, you know, you can put money, and then that money could be, just thinking outside the box here of ways to generate revenue, that I think something made me look at.
Right. When there was a structure, a brick wall, that was one of the things we were talking about, was in the wall. It's the perfect spot to do exactly, you know, like what was done before, to buy a brick. But the same could be done on the surface, especially since we've got some flexibility now. It sounds like for Miles in terms of what those services could be. So,
But we have $700,000 put into a fund for this specifically for these kinds of purposes in the downtown redevelopment fund. We have $700,000.
I'm just saying, George, we have that money, but if you can find a way to not use up the money, I mean, if there's another way you can generate revenue, I'd rather not just.
Right, but coming up with, if we need, let's say we set a cap for the brick soil removal of $60,000.
Right.
You're going to have to sell a lot of bricks really fast to come up with 60 grand. And that's what I'm saying. You know, that they're going to need a number.
Oh, we can.
And not.
I'm not saying we can't go that route. You know, use the money that we've got already on the tax that we set aside for that. But I'm just saying to supplement to along when things are happening, you know, to generate things, because there's going to be the cost of maintaining this park isn't going to go away. And if we find a way to get community involvement, investment into this park beyond what they contribute through the taxes, would be great. It just helps make it that much better, because it's going to evolve, as we said. As trees grow, the sales may come down. The different things are going to change over the years. So
Brad, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, you know, it's a little tricky but we could look more into that grant. There's definitely a lot of state funding available. There is no limit on it. They awarded 2 different grants for 1.2 million. And it appears that there's still 20 million left in the fund. So we kind of have to go at it both ways. We could set some parameters, but if we're able to obtain grant money, certainly our parameters may change if we know that it's money that we only have to match 10% of. And the other thing I was going to suggest is, I think, you know, it seems to me like all of those curb cuts need to just be filled in at some point anyway. And I don't see a reason why we don't use that money now and just fill the curb cuts in. You know, some of those items have been placed there because there are still curb cuts and they could be inviting to vehicles. It seems to me like Ricky could get a quote on closing up those curb cuts and kind of be done with that piece. It seems like that needs to happen at some point, inevitably. But I feel like we have enough information at this point to allow for us to proceed to develop a memo for next time, come back for consensus on an amount to spend right now and get some quotes, look into grants, but at least start to take some action to do some short-term fixes for this summer.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Brad. Andy, your hand is up. Is that a holdover from before?
Sadly, it's not. I just want to add while we're in the conversation that I think the two bicycles that are the bike racks that look like bicycles, people love them and they're great photogenic opportunities and they do work as bike racks, but I don't think people understand the bike racks, but whatever. I think they're dinged up. Am I right? Anybody been walking close enough to those? They look dinged up. If they're dinged up, can we replace them? If they're not dinged up, fine. And can we also add two more? And then can we make them separated? They're too close to the bench and it just looks haphazard. We've got the bench and the two fake bikes that are bike racks that are really nice and artistic looking. They're also functional. But the bench and the bikes are just there. And if they could be separated and set accordingly to look really nice, that would really complement what Bridget and them are doing. And if you had two benches and four of those bikes, it would look amazing. So I don't really care what happens so much as that it looked better than it does. And so if somebody who's involved in this can take a look at that aesthetically, as well as look at the dings and see if there's the possibility to add two more. And yes, Raj, I did mean to move the steel ones back where they were, which was simply on one side of the building, a Firebird, and the other one was over in the parking lot. So they existed over there, just not slammed where they are. And then, sorry, I just feel excited that something might happen and I wouldn't have said the things. And then, damn it. Oh, sorry, I said damn it.
We've heard a lot worse. It's okay.
I appreciate that. Oh, and if we could, this sounds really rude of me, and I didn't ask Harlan, but when somebody said and Harlan, if Harlan could be in those discussions, I would personally feel better because the questions he's asking and the enthusiasm he has and the interest he has and the knowledge he has about parks, if these discussions, if Harlan wanted to, and he could be in that as a resident, I would feel better. And I think that others would too. Okay, then I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Trustees, anything else on this agenda item?
Good.
All right. So I look forward to this coming back, making continued progress. Bridget, Harlan, Brad, George, all of you who have been involved to this point, thank you so much. Appreciate what you've already done and will continue doing. Rick, throw you in there as well. So thank you. Let's go to the next agenda item. Can't see what it is, so whatever it is, come on up.
Utility rate.
Oh, utility rates? All right.
Sorry, the next agenda item is consider warning public hearings for the FY23 proposed utility rates. Yep. Jess, are you with us?
I'm here.
Oh, great. Would you like to take this?
Sure. All right. So I have completed the calculations for all utility rates. We had our tri-town meeting a couple weeks ago as well. So they are ready to be presented. Overall, there are slight increases. And if you'll recall from when Sarah presented the budgets initially, the admin fee that happens between funds was quite high. So she had proposed to reduce that down to just see a modest increase on all of the utility funds or utility rates, sorry, for this coming fiscal year. So you'll see that I believe the water rates are seeing the largest increase. So the fixed charge is increasing about 4.8%, the usage rate about 5%, and the other rates are anywhere from 2.5% to 3 or 4%. Brad, can you scroll down a little bit on that? I think overall, oh no, it's not in there. Okay, so the large user water rate that is assessed to Global Foundries for their usage is increasing from 0.92 up to 11 cents per 1,000 gallons. And as I mentioned, Tri-Town meeting was a couple weeks ago. We presented this and there was no question or concern on this rate increasing from $3.25 per 1,000 gallons up to $3.56.5 per 1,000 gallons. And as far as the budgets, the actual enterprise fund budgets go, nothing has changed from when Sarah presented them and they were approved with the general fund budget as well.
Great. Thank you, Jess.
And I think I just add by policy, the trustees established however many years ago, you do have 2 public hearings on these. So that's what we're warning tonight. And then at those 2 public hearings on June 8th and 22nd, Jess will present all of that data and allow for public question and comment.
Sounds good. Trustees, if there are no comments, questions, concerns, I would entertain the motion that we have.
I'll move that the trustees warn the 2 public hearings for June 8th and June 22nd regarding the proposed FY23 utility rates. And do you want me to make the other?
Should only be one more.
Okay. Yeah, just
I'll second that.
Did you said June 8th, June 22nd?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director. Seconding. Any further discussion on those motions? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Unanimously, thank you all. Jess, thank you for joining us and thank you for taking that effort on.
Absolutely.
And we now have the agenda addition of consider a 5E, consider the reduction in planning commission membership from 7 to 5.
Yeah, and this really, this came on late as an addition due to an email from John Alden, the chair of the Planning Commission, who expressed a dire interest in making this change. Your current capacity on the Planning Commission is 7, and you currently have 4 members, which means all 4 people need to be present in order to create a quorum, have a meeting, and pass anything. That obviously is challenging. If anybody's missing, they can't pass any business. Additionally, one of the members has contributions to some projects that are coming up for consideration and will need to recuse themselves, which means there's no possible way of obtaining a quorum or passing that business. I think this consideration is not just a short-term fix, but I think it's a long-term consideration the trustees should make of transforming that body into a 5-member body. As you recall from last week's conversation, the Zoning Board of Administration will become the DRB effective July 1st. There's only currently 2 members on that board, and that minimum of the DRB will need to be 5 members at least. And so right now you have 6 people out of potentially 10 spots to fill if you had 5 PC and 5 DRB seats. So you don't even, if you at least split them up, if they were interested, you would then have a quorum on each board. Basically, saying you're at a deficit at the moment in terms of citizen interest in these groups. And it's also coming at a time when there's talk of adding a downtown committee, a housing commission, an energy committee, potentially an equity committee, and calling out for a lot more community voices. So I think it's, valiant efforts to create those committees and engage citizens in such work, but you can probably save yourselves a little bit by reducing the maximum number of people on some of those groups. So it's up for you to consider tonight whether or not to reduce that PC from 7 to 5. That can just be a temporary measure. You haven't really set the PC for effective July 1 yet. So if you wanted to, and you weren't totally confident that that's where you want to end up, you at least could do it for the time being and still make a change in the future.
Thank you, Brad, for all the reasons that you mentioned. This is why I was okay with it coming onto the agenda as that walk on instead of trying to wait for our next meeting. And I think the other thing that it allows for is if there are members of the current planning commission who do want to become a part of the DRB instead, this would allow them to do so as well without worrying about having a quorum. Any other questions, concerns?
I don't have concerns about it. It was 5 for many, many years, and then we increased it to 7 so we could increase the likelihood of having a quorum, and that's worked kind of okay, but here we are again.
Right. Yeah. Here we are again at a point in time when we're, as Brad was saying, we're going to have some other committees coming up as well, and we're really going to need some new people to step up.
Can I, if you don't mind me, again,
Yep.
running off at the mouth, we had, and I want to say, I was on the, if we look at the manager recruitment in the hiring committee, we had so many people show up, we had to break it into 2.
Yeah.
And I don't know who's in the audience, and I don't know who is going to be watching this on YouTube, but really, the Development Review Board and the Planning Commission are really, really key committees.
Yep.
I know, and I don't mean to create a hierarchy in my head, but for folks who came out and got involved a little bit in the management committee, the manager search committees, if you liked it and you kind of got a taste of wanting to be involved in city government, being on the planning commission or the development review board is like you are at the core. You're in the middle of where everything happens, and those are really, really critical. And we two of our current soon-to-be city councilors have started out as planning commissioners. And I know on my committee, on the committee I've met with about the recruitment committee, a lot of people had the idea that the manager is the strategic planner and the grand vision thinker, and and I had to sort of say, yeah, no, that's not actually the case. Our planning, like most small communities in Vermont, is done by the planning commission, and that's the grand strategic. That's where the stuff that stuff really happens. So if you are out there and you're listening, and you want to have a really good job and you really want to get involved and pitch in here, please go to the Essex Junction website and consider signing up for the Planning Commission or our newly soon to be created Development Review Board. Thanks.
Well said, George.
All right.
Wish we could just end the meeting at that note.
We
Call
can't.
it a day, but
Just-
yeah.
A public service announcement.
So I would entertain the motion that we have.
I don't have the language here, but
I'll go ahead and I'll move that the trustees change the membership of the planning commission from 7 appointed members to 5, effective today, May 25th, 2022.
second.
Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. Unanimously, thank you all. And that will bring us to the consent agenda.
Approve the consent agenda.
I'll
Second.
Also, I think
Amber
Amber
definitely
had the motion, and I think Raj hasn't had a chance to second it, so
Yeah,
we'll give that one to Raj.
Yes.
Yes! He's made the minute.
Thought I was muted.
Any further discussion? Great. Hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say nay. Great. Passed unanimously. Thank you. How about the reading file and any board or staff comments? Seems like nothing in the room. Anybody in Zoom land? Seeing heads saying no, so then I would entertain the motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Pass unanimously, and we're done, folks. Thank you all for being here. Nice seeing you.